Welcome back to Learn English through Stories with Mayan. If you are here today, maybe you are learning English, maybe you are looking for motivation, or maybe you simply need a quiet moment to think. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad you're listening. On this channel, we don't just practice vocabulary. We don't just repeat sentences. We explore life through simple, clear English. Because sometimes, a story can teach us more than a lesson ever could. Today's story is about a young man named Ethan. He is not famous. He is not extraordinary. He does not have special talents or powerful connections. He is just ordinary. And maybe that is why this story matters. There are no heroes in the story, no sudden miracles, no dramatic rescue, no moment where everything changes overnight. Instead, there is something quieter, a realization, a truth that is difficult to hear, but powerful once you accept it. It is the kind of truth that doesn't shout. It waits. And when you are ready, it changes the way you see your own life. So as you listen, pay attention not only to the words, but to the feelings between them. Notice the small details, the small decisions, because sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest change. Let's begin. Ethan was 24 years old, and most mornings felt the same. His alarm rang at 5:30. He would open his eyes and stare at the ceiling. There was a small crack above his bed that looked like a thin river. He'd been looking at that crack for almost 2 years. Outside, the city was already moving. Cars passed, doors slammed. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Ethan lay still for a few extra minutes, not because he loved sleeping, but because he didn't feel ready to begin another identical day. He worked at a supermarket 5 blocks from his apartment. The job wasn't terrible. It just wasn't anything special. He stacked boxes in the storage room. He arranged products on shelves. He cleaned up spilled juice and broken jars. He helped customers who often avoided eye contact. At the end of each shift, his back hurt and his feet felt heavy. When he returned home, he usually heated something cheap for dinner, scrolled on his phone for an hour, and then went to bed. And every night before sleeping, he told himself the same thing. Something will change soon. He didn't know what, he didn't know how, but he believed that somehow life would eventually move for him. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing moved. One evening, after a long shift, it started to rain. Ethan hadn't checked the weather. His jacket was thin, and within minutes the cold reached his skin. By the time he arrived at his building, his shoes were soaked. He opened his mailbox and found a white envelope. He stood there for a moment before opening it. It was from his landlord. The rent would increase next month. Again. He didn't react immediately. He simply folded the paper and walked upstairs. Inside his apartment, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding the letter in his hand. The room felt unusually quiet. "How am I supposed to keep doing this?" he said softly. There was no answer. That night, he lay awake longer than usual. He wasn't angry. He wasn't dramatic. He was tired. Tired of feeling behind. Tired of feeling small. Tired of hoping something outside him would fix everything. At some point in the darkness, tears rolled slowly into his pillow. Not loud, not desperate, just honest. The next morning at work, Ethan moved more slowly than usual. Mr. Harris noticed. Mr. Harris had worked at the supermarket for over 20 years. He had grey hair, careful movements, and the habit of observing people quietly before speaking. "You didn't sleep much," he said. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Just thinking." "About what?" Ethan hesitated. Then he answered honestly. "I keep waiting for something to change, but nothing does." Mr. Harris nodded as if he recognized the feeling. They stood in silence for a few seconds, surrounded by shelves of cereal boxes. When I was your age, Mr. Harris said slowly, I used to wait too. Ethan looked at him. I thought someone would notice how hard I worked. I thought life would reward me automatically. I thought eventually someone would give me an opportunity. He adjusted a box on the shelf before continuing. No one ever came. Ethan didn't respond. After a moment, Mr. Harris added quietly, No one is coming to save you. The words didn't sound cruel. They sounded calm. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not fear, just clarity. Mr. Harris didn't say anything else. He simply patted Ethan's shoulder and walked away. But the sentence stayed. All day. That evening, Ethan returned to his apartment and looked around carefully. For the first time, he noticed how everything reflected his mood. Clothes piled in a chair, dishes in the sink, unopened envelopes on the table. It wasn't chaos, it was neglect. He sat at the kitchen table and repeated the sentence in his mind. No one is coming to save you. The words felt heavy, but they also felt strangely freeing. If no one was coming, then maybe he didn't have to wait anymore. He opened his old laptop. Instead of scrolling through social media, he searched for something different. How to improve your life. He read slowly. Some words were unfamiliar. He searched their meanings. He wrote notes in a small notebook. He didn't create a perfect plan. He didn't promise dramatic change. He just decided to begin. The next morning, he woke up 30 minutes earlier. It felt uncomfortable. His body resisted. His mind suggested going back to sleep. But he stood up anyway. He stretched awkwardly in the small space between his bed and the wall. He followed a short exercise video online. After 10 minutes, he was already tired. Still, he finished. That night, he cleaned the kitchen completely. The following day, he practiced English pronunciation for 20 minutes. He felt foolish repeating sentences out loud in an empty room, but he continued. He began tracking his spending. He reduced unnecessary expenses. He saved small amounts. He applied for jobs during his lunch breaks. Most applications received no reply. A few brought polite rejection emails. Each one hurt, but this time he didn't stop. Days became weeks. Some mornings he failed and overslept. Some evenings he skipped practice. But instead of quitting completely, he resumed the next day. Something subtle was changing. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was building. 3 months passed. Ethan wasn't rich. His apartment was still small. His job was still the same. But he felt different inside. His posture improved. His voice sounded steadier. When customers spoke to him, he looked at them directly. One afternoon, his phone rang. It was a company he had applied to weeks earlier. They invited him for an interview. After the call ended, he sat very still. Then he smiled, not widely, not dramatically, just quietly. He prepared carefully over the next 2 days. He practiced answering common interview questions. He ironed his cleanest shirt. He reviewed his notes. On the day of the interview, his hands trembled slightly, but he walked in. When asked about his experience, he answered honestly. I'm still learning, he said, but I'm consistent, and I take responsibility for improving. The interviewer listened attentively. 2 days later, Ethan received another call. He got the job. On his first morning at the new office, Ethan arrived early. He stood outside the building for a moment before entering. The air felt cool. The street was quiet. He thought about the night he had sat on his bed holding the rent letter. He thought about the version of himself who had waited for change. The difference between that version and this one wasn't luck. It wasn't rescue. It was decision. He took a breath and walked inside. Ethan's life didn't become perfect after that. There were still challenges. There were still difficult days, but he no longer felt invisible because he understood something important. No one had come to save him, but he had shown up for himself, and that had changed everything. Maybe somewhere in this story you recognize a small part of yourself. Maybe you are still waiting, or maybe you are already taking small steps. Change rarely arrives like a storm. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a decision made at a small kitchen table in a silent apartment on an ordinary night. And from there, life slowly begins to move.